This is Lesson 36, Part 3. Lesson 36 has been order of operations. However, we can't very well go on to the next level, or the next part of order of operations without this piece being refreshed in our memories. So this part of this lesson is designed to dust some of the cobwebs off of several of the things you've already learned so that you're ready for the next level on the order of operations. So, Lesson 36, Part 3, Things We Need to Remember Before Doing Part 4. Go ahead and get the title into your notes and push play when you're ready to begin. The first thing we need to remind ourselves what to do is how to change a fraction into a decimal. We've learned this before, but I'm going to refresh this because as you get into Part 4, some of your order of operations might include something like this, 1.25 times 2/5. So you have a decimal and you're multiplying it by a fraction. Well, you need to, in order to do this, you need to either change this into a fraction or this into a decimal. And in my opinion, changing this to a decimal is easier because if I change this to a fraction, then I have to go through the steps of common denominators and all this stuff. So changing him to a decimal is a little easier in my opinion. So let's change that guy to a decimal. The way we changed fractions to decimals was this skill that we learned in, I think it was lesson 9 or 10, where we divide with decimals and throw lifesavers at it. I divide 5 into 2, bottom into top, and I throw lifesavers at it. So I'm doing 5, oops, I need a pen, 5 into 2. And of course 5 does not fit into 2. There's my decimal. Remember, if you don't see a decimal there, it's hanging out at the end of the number. 5 doesn't fit into 2 at all, so I would put 0. Float my decimal. 0 times 5 is 0, of course. 2 minus 0 is 2. Extend this out a bit. There's a drowning 2 down here. I'm going to throw a lifesaver at him so he doesn't drown. And 5 fits into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. So that decimal is 0.4. So instead I would just do 1.25 times 0.4 or 0.4. Now I could do the math because I know how to multiply decimals by decimals. That's the baby in the car one. We'll get to that reminder too. So fraction into a decimal. And remember, sometimes the division continues on and on and on. Remember, I don't want you dividing forever and ever. So once you get to that thousandths place, this is the tenths, there would be the hundredths, and then the thousandths place. Use that thousandths place number as your upper stay and round it back to the hundredths and just leave it at that. That's close enough. So we don't have to keep dividing. So to change a fraction into a decimal, bottom into top. We're not doing remainder as a numerator, it's bottom into top. Throw lifesavers at it, decimals and lifesaver. The next thing I want to remind you how to do is how we add and subtract decimals. Remember, when you're adding and subtracting decimals, it's like dealing with money, and we must line them up. We've got to line the decimals and every place value up perfectly. So if I had 1.5 plus 2.32, I would put 1.5 on top. I would put the decimal underneath the decimal, the ones place underneath the ones place, the tenths place underneath the tenths place, and then the hundredths place is next. Notice though right here I'm kind of missing a spot, so I would go ahead and put the 0 there. I put an X through it so I know that I added it in there, but it doesn't change anything. Then you can add it up. So remember, when you are adding or subtracting decimals, you must line them up. Write that into your notes. Line them up. So make sure that's in your notes as well as the first part where we changed fraction into a decimal. So we also need to remember add and subtract decimals. I'm better put subtract here because it's the same rule for subtract. We don't need to show both. Add, subtract decimals, line them up. Okay, now the refresher course on multiplying decimals. Multiplying decimals, we did not have to line them up. I kind of gave you the example when we went through these lessons that it was sort of the difference between elementary school and middle school. In elementary school, they learned to add and subtract. And in elementary school, when you guys went from place to place, your teachers put you in a nice straight line. They lined you up. But in middle school, for the most part, we don't have you line up in a nice straight line. We let you kind of go around in a little bit of a blob, a little bit more. And multiply is a little bit more grown up than add, subtract. So we just kind of like let them go off to the side. So we have 2.32 times 1.4. Notice I did not worry about lining anything up. Just really the only thing, if you line anything up, you're just lining up that side there. And I multiply like normal. I completely ignore the decimals. I don't even look at them. I just use my multiplying skills. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 2 is 8 plus 1 is 9. Cross them off. Placeholder Pete. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 2 is 2. Add those together. Notice there's no decimals in here at all. I've completely ignored them. That's what I want to do. Then I've got 8, 4, 9 plus 3 is 12, and 1 plus 2 is 3. All right, so now that I've gotten a final answer, I go back and I look at the decimals, and you've heard me say, don't leave those babies in the car, and that's what I'm talking about is the babies now. So let's not leave our babies in the car. We got to take them out of the car. So starting from this side, we count over how many spots it takes us to get to the decimal. 1, 2 over here, 2, and 1 right here, 1. So that's a total of 3 spots. These numbers I'm writing here are just for my reference. They're not a part of the answer. And so I bring it in 3 spots, 1, 2, 3, and there's where my decimal goes. So that's the refresher on how to multiply your decimals. Now, if you're not understanding these, or if you've missed these, then we can take you back over to the lesson. I'm just kind of crashing through these real quick to remind you how to do them. Okay, and also make sure that you're writing all of this stuff down. You should be writing every piece of this down so you have it all in one place for tomorrow's lesson, or then whenever the next time you have part 4. Dividing decimals is also something we need to dust off cobwebs with. This is you've got to move it. So if you have a decimal in the divisor, we've got to move it. So this is 3.2 divided by 1.4. So I would put 3.2 in the house, 1.4 outside of the house. And here I have a decimal in my divisor. This outside number is the divisor. And if you have a decimal in your divisor, you've got to move it all the way to the end of the number, however many steps it takes. In this case, it only takes 1 step to get there. So we move it once, and in the dividend, we match it. If we moved it once there, then we match it once here, and we pop it to the top. Now that I've done that, I don't have to worry about decimals anymore. I can just do my division. 14 fitting into 32. I think it's going to fit twice. Any more than that, I think that I'm going to have some eyebrows blowing off. Yeah, just twice. I'm going to get 28. Subtract. I've got to borrow. 0. 14 into 40. 3 times for sure. Oh, no, blew my eyebrows off. 2 times apparently. 28. I've got to borrow. 14 into 120. Okay, well, we're talking about a lot now. I'm going to guess at a 7. 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 1 is 7, 8, 9. I'm going to guess at an 8. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 1 is 8, 9, 10, 11. That's going to be it. I've got to borrow. That leaves me with 8. Last 0 I need to throw down because I'm about to head into my thousandths place, and Mrs. Sanchez says after that I can just round it. It's cool. So 7 is going to be too high. I'm looking at my math lab and I'm seeing this here, and that's too high. So it must be a 6. So I better do 14 times 6. That's 24, 6, 7, 8. Okay, then it's not. Oops. It's not 6. I guess it's a 5. 25, 6, 7. So it's a 5. And I know I have a remainder, but I'll just, whatever, just live with it being there. Just kind of ignore it now. This is my thousandths place. I get to round back to this place. This is an up number, so he's going to be a 9. So my answer would be 2.29. And there's your refresher course on how to divide with decimals. Again, there is a whole lesson for that, so if you need to go back and look at that, that's something that you can do. Okay, the fifth thing that we need to have cobwebs dusted off of is how to add and subtract fractions. And remember, when we add or subtract fractions, we have to have a common denominator, meaning the bottom number needs to be the same thing. And these aren't, so I need to do some magic to get those the same. I find what the LCM between those two numbers is, and I can do that by pulling out any common divisors they have. There isn't really anything that goes into both 4 and 3, so I just multiply them together, and that gives me 12. So what I need is for my new denominator to be 12. And then I ask myself, what is it that I do to a 4 in order to beat him up to become a 12? Oh, if I beat him up with a 3, if I multiply by 3, that would do it. Well, if I'm going to do that to the denominator, I have to do that to his best friend, the numerator, as well, the exact same thing. So 3 times 3 is 9. And what did I do to the 3? To get him to become a 12, I multiplied him by a 4 and did the same to his best friend. 2 times 4 is 8. Next step, now that my denominators are the same, I add across the numerators, or if it was subtract, I'd subtract. 9 plus 8 is 17. The next step is check and convert it if I need to, and check if it's in proper fraction, an upside down snowman, and it is. And so the way I fix that is bottom into top, remainder is the numerator. So I go 12 into 17, and of course it only goes once, and my remainder is a 5. So my answer is 1 and 5/12. And at last step, I also am checking for reduced fractions, and 5/12 is as reduced as it gets. So there is my answer, 1 and 5/12. So there's the dust off of cobwebs for add, subtract fractions. You have the steps in that lesson from when we covered that something, it's like 29, lesson 29 or lesson 30. And so you can copy down those steps into this section of your notes if you want, or maybe just tab your notes so you can refer to them tomorrow if you need them, or next time we do part 4. Okay, the sixth thing, there's 7 things total, the sixth thing that I want to dust your cobwebs off about is how to multiply fractions. And this is a pretty recent skill that we've done, so hopefully this is still fairly fresh in your mind. So we have got 2/5 times 3/4. Our first step was to change them all to fractions. They are fractions already, so we're good there. Second step was to cross-reduce, make these numbers workable. 3 and 5, nothing goes into both of those. 2 and 4, yeah, 2 goes into both of those. 2 fits into 2 once, and 2 fits into 4 twice. Multiply straight across. 1 times 3 is 3, and 5 times 2 is 10. Convert if it's improper, it's proper. Reduce if it's reducible, it's not reducible. There's your answer. So there's that refresher course, crash course, refresher course on multiplying fractions. You can view the tutorial or the lesson on it that's specifically for that if you need a lot more explanation to it. And finally, how do we divide with fractions? Oops, that's supposed to be divide. Pretend that was divide. Let's say I have 2/3 divided by 4/9. So it's almost the same step as multiply. In fact, what we do is we just work it into be a multiply problem. So I have 2/3 divided by 4/9. Instead, I'm going to change it to multiply by doing the opposite of that one. So I will put 2/3, same, times, and by flipping this, giving the reciprocal of this, that's why I was able to change this divide into multiply. Now that I've flipped the second fraction, I use my multiply steps. Cross-reduce. Let's see, 2 and 4. 2 goes into both of those. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 4 twice. and the cross reduction of 3 and 9. 3 goes into both of those. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 9 3 times. Multiply straight across. 1 times 3 is 3. And multiply straight across. 1 times 2 is 2. Convert if it's improper. It's improper, so bottom into top. Goes in once. Remainder is the numerator. Your answer is 1 1/2. And again, there's a whole lesson on that too if you need several examples. And there's a whole tutorial on that too. If you need several examples, you can kind of look through those for more examples if you're not feeling real confident about any pieces of these 7 items that I went through. The reason I went through them because in part 4, you're going to have order of operation problems, but they're going to include decimals and fractions and a mixture of them, and we need to be able to use all of those skills that we've already learned and put it together with this. So it was important that we'd kind of dust those cobwebs off, get it all clear in our head, so that in part 4, when we're tackling things like this, we can do that. Go ahead and get your closure questions. It practices all of these pieces that we just went over. You can review whichever lessons you need to that you were weak on, that you felt like you needed more explanation. You can go ahead and find those lessons and review them. You don't have to take all the notes on them, but just like see the examples. Or you can come to me and we can look at things a little bit further.